Hi.
We are students from Warsaw and participants in project Filomates, which is about the connection between philosophy and mathematics. So to start, I would like to ask you a question about your interest in philosophy and why it is so important for you.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I thought that I wanted to do theoretical physics. And in college, I studied physics. And while I was studying physics, I decided, okay, I have to figure out what my research field is going to be in. So I looked around and I tried many different sorts of problems. And the thing that caught my interest the most, I found, were foundational questions. Questions like, does quantum mechanics tell us that there is action at a distance? Is classical electromagnetism incompatible with the concept of causation? These were the kinds of things that really I found the most interesting. But I discovered that it's difficult to study those sorts of things in a graduate program in physics. Most physics departments and physics research groups are focused on other sorts of questions. There are individual physicists who are interested in these sorts of questions. However, it's difficult to find a PhD position where one knows that one is going to study that sort of thing. So I started to look around elsewhere. I was also starting to become a bit disillusioned with my studies in physics because I felt like a lot of it, we got these little morsels of these foundational issues, but then it was a lot about calculating things and being able to do complex mathematical maneuvers on paper without really understanding what you were doing. So I was always interested in humanistic issues as well. So I thought actually that I was going to change to studying history of science, in particular the history of physics. And I thought my study of physics would be very helpful for that. At the same time, though, for my undergraduate degree, I had to write a bachelor's thesis. And my bachelor's thesis advisor was in the philosophy department. And he encouraged me to apply to programs in philosophy for graduate school. I thought that it might be something interesting to do because I was interested in foundational issues in physics. But I didn't think that I was going to get in anywhere because I had hardly studied philosophy formally during college. But I did apply, and in the end, I applied to physics programs, history programs, and philosophy programs. I got into about half the physics programs, none of the history programs, and all of the philosophy programs. So by the time I had to make a decision, I knew that I wasn't going to continue studying physics. So then it was just a matter of choosing which philosophy program to go to. I think that ultimately the reason why I felt at home, and I continue to feel at home in philosophy, is that the central goal of inquiry is really well matched to my personal motivations. The thing that motivates me the most is I want to personally understand how the world works, and that type of goal is something which is always supported in philosophy.
According to the topic of our project, do you see some deep connections between natural sciences, mathematics, and philosophy eventually?
Of course. I think if you look historically, historical researchers and thinkers, even just 100 or 150 years ago, didn't think that there was actually such a big distinction between natural sciences and philosophy. They were just different ways of approaching the same sort of subject. And the way that science has been institutionalized in our society, the way that it's now integrated with government and is run through a funding cycle which gives it a lot more power than it used to because there's more resources behind it, but at the same time it changes how it is connected with other disciplines. So for my view, I'm sympathetic to these historical figures who didn't really see there's that big of a difference between natural sciences and philosophy. I think they're both aiming at a similar sort of thing, trying to understand the world and our place in it.
You've told that you are also interested in humanistic studies.
Yeah, that's right.
So, what about connection between them and natural sciences?
Mm.
Do you see any, or they are completely separate beings?
Mm-hmm. There's a great many connections. One of the things, for example, coming back to the 19th century, people saw as the big conflict between progress in natural science and in humanistic studies was that it seemed that natural sciences indicate that the world is completely deterministic. And philosophers and indeed physicists and natural scientists at the time were concerned about the conflict between ideas of free will and the ideas of physics. I find this study fascinating. There's other aspects as well. For instance, a lot of the methods that have been developed in modern physics for understanding complex physical systems, it turns out, can also be useful sometimes for understanding complex social phenomena. So even though I don't often work on that particular subject, or at least not yet, I have many colleagues who use these types of techniques to have a kind of conceptual approach for understanding how group behavior emerges, how language acquires meaning, how biological populations can adapt to new circumstances without doing so intentionally. One can use the methods, the mathematical methods, that many of which were developed in natural sciences in these sorts of contexts to make a lot of great conceptual progress.
Do you believe in unity of knowledge, or
that's a good question.
So far?
That's a good question. It's a difficult question. For me, I do believe in it, but I don't have a proof of it. For me, it's a kind of regulative ideal. What do I mean by that? I mean that I use the idea of the unity of a knowledge as a way of guiding how I do research. So the kinds of questions that I choose and the way that I investigate problems is with an eye towards how am I going to unify this knowledge with the other knowledge that I have. It may turn out that doing that is not possible in the end. So, but I use it as an idea to structure how I proceed in my research. So I'm hopeful that it's correct, but I have no proof of it.
You would be surprised how many topics are repeated, in fact, because I think 2 or 3 professors said about the unity of knowledge in the history, and Professor Kush, before the lunch, said about the relation between consciousness and physics. And there were also a few professors who said that they started studying physics and they were disillusioned, so they started to be interested in philosophy. So indeed there are so many common things, so we can assume that in fact this unity and these connections exist, and most of the scientific society agrees to it.
That could be the case. I think there's another way of reading the situation, though. My preferred way of reading the situation is that because of the way science is institutionalized, which I mentioned before, that members of scientific communities have a motivation for undergoing certain sorts of activities and avoiding certain other sorts of activities. So in these situations that happened in my past that nudged me towards philosophy, I don't think it's because the scientists involved or my teachers involved thought that foundational inquiry had no connection with what they were looking at, but rather they thought that the proper training that I should receive doesn't include those kinds of questions. So I think that is completely compatible with the unity of knowledge.